All right, so you want to know more about Bitcoin, huh? Well, we went deep on this one. Digital gold Bitcoin and the inside story of the Misfits and Millionaires trying to reinvent money.
Mm.
And let me tell you what a story.
Yeah, it's wild. Really a fascinating look at the origins of Bitcoin.
Definitely. So before we get into all that crazy stuff for anyone listening who maybe isn't super familiar with Bitcoin, what is it exactly?
Well, simply put, Bitcoin is a digital currency that exists only online. No banks, no governments involved. It allows for direct peer-to-peer transactions.
So kind of like digital cash, but way more complicated and with a whole lot of libertarian philosophy mixed in.
That's a pretty good way to put it. This book really digs deep into the early adopters, these so-called cypherpunks. These folks were a fascinating
They
bunch.
sound like they're straight out of sci-fi novel.
Yeah, some of them were pretty out there. Take Hal Finney, for example.
Hmm.
Brilliant programmer, super into cryptography and privacy software. And get this, the guy was obsessed with cryogenics.
Wait, cryogenics? Like freezing yourself to be revived in the future?
Yeah, exactly. It really highlights this long-term vision that a lot of early Bitcoin people had. They saw this technology as something that could change the world, break free from the control of governments and institutions.
It's amazing how these ideas all came together to create this groundbreaking technology.
Yeah.
But speaking of beginnings, who actually created Bitcoin, the book talks about this mysterious figure, Satoshi Nakamoto.
Ah, yes, the enigmatic Satoshi Nakamoto. To this day, no one knows for sure who they are or if it was even just one person.
So we've got this revolutionary technology shrouded in mystery from the get-go. How did people even get their hands on Bitcoin in those early days?
That's where Bitcoin mining comes in. It's a process where computers solve complex math problems to verify transactions and add them to the blockchain. That's the public ledger that records every Bitcoin transaction ever made. And the computers that solve these problems, they get rewarded with newly created Bitcoins.
So it wasn't exactly a get-rich-quick scheme back then.
Not really. It took a certain kind of vision, belief in the technology. Someone like Gavin Andreessen, he was a key programmer who saw Bitcoin's potential early on and became a lead developer working alongside Satoshi.
Wow, so you've got this mix of libertarian ideals, technical innovation, and this whole air of mystery. It's no wonder it attracted such a diverse group of people. But the story doesn't end there. Bitcoin's popularity started attracting another crowd altogether.
You're right, those early libertarian folks were just the beginning. Bitcoin's anonymity and decentralized nature made it pretty popular on a platform you might have heard of, Silk Road.
Silk Road, the infamous dark web marketplace.
The one and only. It operated on the dark web, a hidden part of the internet you can't access through regular search engines, and they use Bitcoin as their main currency.
So that anonymity that was so appealing to the cypherpunks, it also created some serious issues. Tell us about the people behind Silk Road and how they fit into this whole Bitcoin saga.
Well, there was this guy, Jed McCaleb. He created the file-sharing platform eDonkey and got frustrated with the lack of ways to buy and sell Bitcoin, so he decided to create his own exchange. Mt. Gox.
And Gox. That name rings a bell. Didn't things go south with them?
Yeah, Mt. Gox became the go-to exchange for Silk Road users. It was all about that anonymity. And that's where Ross Ulbricht comes in, also known as Dread Pirate Roberts, the guy behind Silk Road. His story is a perfect example of the double-edged sword of anonymity.
Sounds like things were getting pretty out of control. Was anyone trying to make Bitcoin more mainstream amidst all this?
Oh yeah, there was definitely a push for that.
Oh.
Some people were really trying to bring Bitcoin to the masses.
So who are these Bitcoin champions trying to bring it from the dark web to everyday people?
One of the most vocal advocates was Roger Ver, a staunch libertarian who actually renounced his U.S. citizenship to become a Bitcoin evangelist. He even funded early Bitcoin meetups in China. Talk about commitment.
Wow, that's hardcore.
Then there was Charlie Shrem, a young entrepreneur who saw Bitcoin's potential but knew it needed to be easier to use. So he started BitInstant, a company that aimed to simplify buying and selling Bitcoin. And he even gained attention of some very familiar names.
Are you about to tell me the Winklevoss twins invested in Bitcoin?
You guessed it. They put money into BitInstant, which for some people legitimized the whole thing. It was a sign that Bitcoin could be more than just this niche thing.
It sounds like Bitcoin was well on its way to becoming mainstream. But was it all smooth sailing from there?
Not quite. As Bitcoin grew, it faced a ton of obstacles. Price swings, technical issues, government scrutiny, even infighting within the Bitcoin community itself.
The growing pains of a new technology, huh? What were some of the biggest challenges they faced?
Well, the most dramatic event was the Mt. Gox hack and collapse. Remember Jed McCaleb, the founder? Well, he ended up selling the exchange to Mark Karpeles, who wasn't exactly a tech whiz or that concerned about security.
Oh, this can't be good.
It wasn't. Hackers found a weakness in the system and stole a massive amount of Bitcoin. The company went bankrupt, and it sent shockwaves through the entire Bitcoin community. It was a harsh reminder of the risks involved in this new, unregulated world.
So the digital gold rush had some very real consequences. What else was going on during this time?
Well, besides the Mt. Gox fiasco, we saw the rise of mining pools, where people combined their computing power to increase their chances of earning Bitcoin. And then there were these specialized mining machines called ASICs. These things led to the industrialization of Bitcoin mining, making it almost impossible for regular folks to compete.
It sounds like things were getting a lot more complex and competitive. What about the legal side of things, where government's finally starting to pay attention?
Oh, yeah. Companies like Charlie Shrem's BitInstant caught the eye of regulators like FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They were worried about money laundering and other illegal activities that Bitcoin could enable.
So the Wild West days of Bitcoin were coming to an end. What happened to Charlie Shrem and BitInstant?
BitInstant struggled to keep up with the increasing regulations, and unfortunately, Charlie was eventually arrested for violating money transmission laws. It was a wake-up call for the whole Bitcoin community, showing them they couldn't just ignore the law.
From Silk Road to government crackdowns, Bitcoin's journey was anything but predictable. But in the midst of all this chaos, was there anything positive happening?
Actually, yes. Amidst all the drama, something remarkable was happening. The technology behind Bitcoin, the blockchain, it started attracting attention from a whole different crowd. Silicon Valley investors and even Wall Street bankers.
Really? The big players were starting to take notice? But I'm guessing they weren't exactly Bitcoin enthusiasts?
Yeah, many of them were still skeptical of Bitcoin itself. But they saw the potential of the blockchain, this underlying technology that made Bitcoin possible.
So what was it about the blockchain that got them so excited?
The blockchain is essentially a decentralized and tamper-proof ledger. It's a super secure and transparent way to record and verify transactions. Think of people like Wences Casares, an Argentinian entrepreneur who'd witnessed firsthand how fragile traditional financial systems could be. He believed Bitcoin could be like digital gold, a safe haven from unstable currencies.
Digital gold. That's a pretty powerful concept.
It is, and it wasn't just about replacing regular money. People started imagining all sorts of uses for the blockchain beyond finance, things like secure record keeping and supply chain management. The possibilities seemed endless.
So even as Bitcoin faced all these challenges, the seeds of a technological revolution were being planted. Where did all of this leave Bitcoin and its community by the end of 2014?
By 2014, Bitcoin was at a crossroads trying to figure out its future. There were debates about its direction, concerns about whether it could handle more users, and worries about the increasing power of a few big mining companies. It was a time of reflection and uncertainty as the early pioneers look back on how far they'd come and try to make sense of this rapidly changing landscape.
What a fascinating turning point in Bitcoin's history. And this is where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dives. Stay tuned.
Yeah, so as Bitcoin entered 2014, the community had to deal with all these new challenges and the changing landscape. It's interesting to see how they navigated this whole period. You know, some individuals like Hal Finney, who sadly passed away that year, remained firm in their belief that Bitcoin had the power to change the world. Others, like Marty Malmy, one of the earliest developers, he kind of looked back on the journey with a mix of pride and disillusionment.
It's kind of like any movement that experiences such rapid growth, right? There are bound to be disagreements, growing pains, even some disillusionment along the way. What about Satoshi Nakamoto? Were there any updates or developments regarding the mysterious creator?
The mystery of Satoshi just continued adding to the whole intrigue surrounding Bitcoin. Despite numerous attempts to unmask them, Satoshi's true identity remained a secret, fueling all sorts of speculation and conspiracy theories. It's almost like they vanished into thin air, leaving behind this revolutionary technology that continued to evolve and challenge conventional thinking.
Vanishing into thin air, leaving everyone else to figure it out. What a story. So you have this movement struggling with its identity, Silicon Valley and Wall Street starting to take notice, and the enduring mystery of Satoshi. What happened next?
Well, in the midst of all the turmoil and uncertainty, a new wave of Bitcoin companies and investors emerged. They were determined to build on the foundations laid by those early pioneers. They focused on tackling technical challenges, navigating the complex regulatory landscape, and bringing Bitcoin to a wider audience.
So it's like a phoenix rising from the ashes of Mt. Gox. Who are some of the key players in this next chapter of the Bitcoin saga?
One company that quickly gained traction was Coinbase, founded by Brian Armstrong and Fred Ursum. They wanted to make Bitcoin more accessible to everyday people, offering a user-friendly platform for buying, selling, and storing Bitcoin.
Coinbase, I've definitely heard of them. They're one of the biggest cryptocurrency exchanges today, aren't they?
That's right. Their user-friendly platform and focus on regulatory compliance helped make Bitcoin more appealing to people who might have been hesitant to enter this new and often confusing space.
So it sounds like some were really focused on bringing Bitcoin to the mainstream. Were there others still holding on to those early cypherpunk ideals of decentralization and disrupting the system?
Absolutely. There was definitely a growing tension between those who saw Bitcoin as a tool for radical financial change and those who adopted a more pragmatic approach, focused on building businesses and working within existing systems.
A classic clash of ideologies. It seems like every technological revolution faces this kind of dilemma. So on one hand, you have companies like Coinbase striving for mainstream acceptance. What was happening on the other side of the spectrum?
You had individuals and organizations deeply committed to those decentralized, anti-establishment principles that were at the heart of Bitcoin. They were kind of suspicious of the growing interest from Wall Street and Silicon Valley, worried that Bitcoin was losing its soul.
So they weren't too thrilled about the suits coming in and trying to tame the Wild West of crypto.
Yeah, exactly. They feared that the very institutions Bitcoin was designed to circumvent were now trying to co-opt it, potentially diluting its original purpose and power.
It sounds like a real clash of cultures brewing within the Bitcoin community. Were there any events or specific developments that highlighted this growing tension?
One notable development was the emergence of alternative cryptocurrencies, or altcoins as they're often called. These were projects inspired by Bitcoin, but with different technical features or philosophical aims.
So it was like the Bitcoin ecosystem was branching out, exploring different possibilities and paths.
Exactly. One of the most successful altcoins was Litecoin, created by Charlie Lee, a former Google engineer.
Wait, the same Charlie Shrem from BitInstant?
No, a different Charlie. Charlie Lee Litecoin was designed to be faster and more efficient than Bitcoin for everyday transactions. It appealed to those who saw limitations in Bitcoin's functionality as a payment system.
So it was like a friendly rivalry within the crypto world, pushing the boundaries of what this technology could do.
Exactly. The rise of altcoins really reflected the diversity of thought within the cryptocurrency community. Some wanted to build upon Bitcoin's foundation, while others sought to create something entirely new and different.
So we have Coinbase striving for user-friendliness, altcoins like Litecoin offering alternative approaches, and this underlying tension between those seeking revolution and those focused on practical applications. What else was happening in the world of Bitcoin during this time?
Well, as Bitcoin gained more attention, it inevitably attracted its fair share of critics and skeptics. Governments grappled with how to regulate this new technology, banks worried about the potential disruption to their business models, and economists debated its long-term viability.
It sounds like Bitcoin was becoming a force to be reckoned with, generating both excitement and concern. Were there any major events or pronouncements from those in power?
One significant development was the U.S. Senate hearing on Bitcoin in November 2013. It was a pivotal moment, signaling that Bitcoin had reached a level of prominence that required attention from lawmakers.
A Senate hearing. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
What was the general sentiment toward Bitcoin from the senators?
The hearing surprised many people. Actually, several senators expressed a surprisingly positive and open-minded stance toward Bitcoin and the underlying blockchain technology. They acknowledged the potential for innovation and job creation, but of course also voiced concerns about consumer protection and the potential for illicit activities.
So it wasn't a complete denouncement of this new technology?
Not at all. Many saw it as a victory for the Bitcoin community, demonstrating that the technology was being taken seriously by those in positions of power. It also highlighted the need for open dialogue and collaboration between the Bitcoin industry and regulators, paving the way for future engagement and development.
It seems like that Senate hearing was a big step towards legitimacy for Bitcoin. Were there any other notable milestones during this period?
Absolutely. One fascinating development was the increasing interest in Bitcoin from the financial industry, particularly those focused on payments and remittances.
Remittances. That's the money people send back home to their families in other countries, right?
Yeah, exactly. Companies like Japo, founded by Wences Caceres, remember him, the digital gold advocate we talked about earlier, they saw a huge opportunity to use Bitcoin to make cross-border payments faster, cheaper, and more accessible for millions of people around the world.
So Bitcoin was being seen as a potential solution to a very real problem faced by many people globally. It seems like despite the challenges, there was a sense of optimism and possibility in the air.
There was. You're right. There was a growing recognition that Bitcoin and the blockchain had the potential to revolutionize not just finance, but many other industries as well.
So as we approach the end of 2014, we have Bitcoin gaining mainstream attention, alternative cryptocurrencies emerging, a Senate hearing, lending a degree of legitimacy and growing interest from the financial industry. It was a whirlwind of activity. What about the technological side of things? Were there any major advancements or breakthroughs happening during this time?
The Bitcoin network continued to grow and evolve, with developers constantly working to improve scalability, security, and functionality. However, there were also growing concerns about the increasing concentration of mining power in the hands of a few large companies.
So the decentralization that was so central to Bitcoin's early philosophy was facing a new challenge.
Exactly. The rise of these large-scale mining operations with their specialized hardware and access to cheap energy made it extremely difficult for individual miners to compete. This raised concerns about potential vulnerabilities and the possibility of manipulation of the network.
It seems like a classic dilemma of technological progress. Efficiency often comes at the expense of decentralization. Were there any other technological hurdles that Bitcoin faced during this period?
One major issue was the limited number of transactions the network could process per second. This limited Bitcoin's ability to scale and become a truly global payment system.
So it wasn't quite ready to compete with the likes of Visa or MasterCard in terms of transaction volume?
Not at that point. But developers were already exploring various solutions to address the scalability challenge, such as increasing the block size or implementing what are known as second-layer technologies. It was a race against time to see if Bitcoin could truly live up to its potential.
A race against time, indeed. It seems like 2014 was a pivotal year for Bitcoin, full of both triumphs and tribulations. Before we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive, I'm curious about those early pioneers, the ones who had been there from the very beginning. What were their thoughts and reflections as they witnessed Bitcoin's incredible journey?
That's a great question. Many of them, like Hal Finney, maintained their optimism about Bitcoin's long-term potential, even as they acknowledged the challenges and setbacks along the way. They viewed these growing pains as a natural part of the evolution of any truly revolutionary technology.
It speaks to their unwavering belief in the power of decentralization and the potential of this technology to change the world. What about the others, those who maybe moved on or became disillusioned? What were their perspectives?
Some, like Marty Malmy, expressed a sense of pride mixed with disappointment. They were proud of their role in building this groundbreaking technology, but also felt some regret about how Bitcoin had strayed from its original ideals.
A bittersweet feeling for sure. It's like watching something you helped create grow and evolve in ways you didn't entirely anticipate.
That's a great analogy. It's a reminder that technological revolutions are often messy and unpredictable, shaped by a complex interplay of human motivations, ideological clashes, and unforeseen consequences.
A reminder that history is often written by those who succeed. But the stories of the pioneers and dreamers, those who came before, are equally important, even if their visions don't fully come to fruition. But before we delve too deeply into those philosophical waters, let's take a moment to gather our thoughts. We'll be back shortly to wrap up this deep dive into Bitcoin and the inside story. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into Bitcoin. We've talked about those early cypherpunk ideals, the rise and fall of Silk Road, the emergence of mining pools, and the growing interest from Silicon Valley and Wall Street few. It's been a wild ride.
It really has. What amazes me is how Bitcoin not only survived, but actually thrived despite all the ups and downs, the volatility, the scandals, the infighting. By 2014, it had become a real force to be reckoned with, shaking up the global financial system.
It's a real David and Goliath story.
Yeah.
But in the digital age, earlier we talked about Bitcoin's potential impact on society as a whole. Were there any real-world examples of this starting to happen by 2014?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Take Argentina, for example. They were dealing with some serious economic instability and strict currency controls. For a lot of Argentinians, Bitcoin offered a way to protect their savings and participate in the global economy without relying on a fragile and restrictive financial system.
So for them, Bitcoin wasn't just some abstract tech thing. It was a real solution to real problems.
Exactly. It gave people a sense of empowerment and financial freedom, especially those who felt excluded by traditional financial institutions.
That's incredible. Really shows the potential of this technology. But we can't ignore the potential downsides either. We talked earlier about Silk Road and the possibility of Bitcoin being used for illegal activities. Was that still a major concern in 2014?
Unfortunately, yeah, it was. While a lot of people believed in Bitcoin's potential for good, it also attracted criminals and those looking to exploit its anonymity for their own gain. Ransomware attacks are becoming increasingly common, where hackers would lock down computer systems and demand payment in Bitcoin.
It's a reminder that any powerful tool can be used for both good and bad. It sounds like Bitcoin was at a crossroads facing a real test of its values. Would it be a force for positive change or just another tool for those looking to game the system?
You hit the nail on the head. That struggle continues to this day. The future of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general is still being written. Will it become a mainstream payment system, a digital gold standard, a tool for financial inclusion, or something completely different? Only time will tell.
So many possibilities, so many unanswered questions. It's both exciting and a little bit scary, wouldn't you say? But that's what disruptive technologies do. They challenge our assumptions and make us rethink what's possible.
I couldn't agree more. That's why it's so important to understand the history, the motivations, the successes and failures of those who came before us. It gives us the context we need to navigate the complexities of today and make better decisions about the future we want to build.
That's a great point. So for our listener, why should they care about the story of Bitcoin? What makes it relevant to their lives?
The journey of Bitcoin is really a reflection of the larger technological revolution we're all living through. It's a story about the power of ideas, the allure of decentralization, the constant push and pull between innovation and regulation, and the human desire for freedom and control.
It's a story that makes us think critically about the role of technology in our lives, question the systems we often take for granted, and consider the potential consequences, both positive and negative, of the choices we make. Whether Bitcoin ultimately succeeds or fails as a currency is almost beside the point. Its true legacy lies in the questions it raises and the conversations it starts.
Exactly. Bitcoin may not have lived up to all the early hype, but the blockchain technology it introduced is still in its infancy. It has the potential to transform finance technology and society in ways we can't even fully imagine. That's something we should all be thinking about.
That's an important takeaway for our listeners. We encourage you to keep learning about Bitcoin and blockchain technology on your own. Who knows, you might even uncover some mysteries of your own along the way.
And remember, the most valuable things you can take away from this deep dive aren't just the facts and figures, but the underlying principles, the human stories, and the motivations that drive innovation and shape the course of history.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Bitcoin and the inside story. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring.